I'm Arizona Family political editor Dennis Welch.
Dennis, fake news Welch. Try to tell the truth.
And this is the Politics Unplugged podcast.
Dennis, if you have a problem with substance abuse, I am more than willing to talk to you anytime you need.
And good evening, I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and welcome to this special live breaking news edition of Politics Unplugged, the podcast today. A look at today's historic abortion ruling that reinstated the 1864 territorial law. The law bans all abortions in all cases except when the mother's life is at risk. And I want to go through a couple of specifics here. The law dates back to 1864. It goes into effect in about 60 days, criminalizes nearly all abortions, no exceptions for rape, no exceptions for incest. The only exception, again, if the mother's life is at risk. And I want to bring in a couple of reporters from our investigative team, Morgan Loew and Amy Cutler. You guys have been looking into this all day long, some of the ramifications, particularly some of the legal aspects of this. And let's start first. I want to get your top takes about what you've been looking at today from this ruling.
Well, it's really interesting to see how the justices came down on this. I specifically looked at they were all appointed by Republican governors, but it was interesting to see kind of, it was all Ducey appointees who the majority opinion in this. And it was interesting to see how they navigated all of this.
And Morgan?
Yeah, I rewatched the arguments, the oral arguments yesterday, and it was interesting to see the two justices who really questioned everybody, both sides, both the and the other side, the pro-choice side, and they were skeptical. They seemed to be very skeptical of the anti-abortion side of this argument, and those were the two justices that dissented. There weren't many questions from the other justices. Justice Bullock asked a couple of questions. One other justice asked a question, but it was mostly Timmerer and Brutinel, and they both dissented. And the other justices really just kind of sat there and watched. So if you watched the oral arguments, you probably walked away with the idea that, okay, this is going to come down the way the Court of Appeals came down on it, which was keeping intact this 15 weeks for elective abortion and then making it illegal unless it's a case of life and death of the mother afterwards. So it was a bit of a surprise to see the case come down the way it did this morning.
A bit of a surprise. I mean, I got to tell you, like the entire world, the political world was shocked by this one. Everybody was expecting. I think on all sides of this argument, we're very much expecting that they would keep that 15-week ban in place. And some of the proof out there is when we see big controversial decisions like this happen, we see a lot of protests, right? Well, a lot of those protests in times like this are organized beforehand because they're expecting something to go one way or the other. You didn't see any of that today. In fact, you saw a lot of statements, and we'll be getting to some of those statements from some of the Republicans who supported this bill, actually saying that they were disappointed with the way this turned out. Now, we did get some sound. I want to play this for you right now with Kathy Herod. Now, she is very much being one of the top anti-abortion activists in Arizona, and she was celebrating this ruling today. I want to play her sound right now and get your reaction on the other side.
So today's ruling furthers the legislative policy decision of many years for us to be a pro-life state, to have our laws protect the health and safety of women, as well as the lives of unborn children. So today was a victory for unborn children, for vulnerable children, and for women.
What do you think of that? What do you think of what she had to say about that?
One of the other things she said was that she celebrated this because she said that the court did not make law, the court just interpreted the law. But the way that this court got to the decision has a lot of people scratching their heads. What this court appears to have done is ignored a lot of law and just based its opinion on this 100-plus-year-old law and enforced that while ignoring the other law. And the way the Court of Appeals ruled on this it harmonized all these laws together. It sort of made them work together. And you talk to lawyers who are really experts at this kind of thing, and everybody I spoke to said that they thought that Court of Appeals decision was pretty well thought out and well-rounded. And this court just disregarded all of that and said it's that 1800s law, and that's it.
And what were you digging into? And what happens now, 60 days from now? Obviously, there was a little bit of confusion at the beginning. If you were watching earlier in the morning, whatever news outlet originally, even the governor was saying it was going to take 14 days because that was the stay on the court. But now we learned it's going to be about 60 days before this law takes effect, barring any other legal actions. So what kinds of penalties are we looking at? Because women aren't going to face criminal prosecutions. It's all in the doctors, correct?
Right. But there is still a lot of uncertainty. I spoke with one constitutional law expert from ASU who was saying that he doesn't really see this taking effect until after November, because he believes that there's going to be just so many legal challenges that we're really going to be muddled in it, and there's not really, it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out, but he doesn't see that this is going to take effect before November.
And I know maybe we were planning to talk a little bit more about this at the end, but I am kind of worried, curious to put some of this in context. We're talking about Civil War era laws and whatnot. What did you guys find when you went to go look for some of the original legislation that this was based on?
The original language for this came out of something called the Howell Code, which was really Arizona's first set of laws that were enacted, I believe, in the 1860s, yeah. And so we pulled some of them just to look at the language, to give us an idea of how lawmakers were thinking, what were they viewing at that time. And just one example here, in a civil case, it says here, when a married woman is a party, her husband shall be with her. So wow. If you sued a married woman, you sue the husband. What does that tell you? That married women didn't really have all the rights. So that was sort of the mindset. There was another interesting type of law that we looked at, and it was called mayhem. It consists of unlawfully depriving a human member of his or her body, or disfiguring or rendering it. The language that they used and the types of laws that were included in this were fascinating because of the words they used, and it gives you an insight to what society was like back then. And I will tell you, there are a lot of words that we just can't say today that were in that law, relating to people's race and relating to children whose fathers they didn't know. I mean, these words that we know, we just are not going to say. And that was common use in the Howell Code. Well,
and put it in perspective, too. I mean, this was a time when women couldn't even vote.
Right, exactly right. Exactly right.
And this was something, I believe, some people, Attorney General Chris Mays was pointing out. What were some of the, opponents, people that are for expanding access for abortion, people like Chris Mays? When you were talking to them today, when you were watching some of these interviews, what were you hearing from them today?
Well, it's just such a, I think really nobody expected this. I mean, this law dates back 160 plus years. I think, there's the political ramifications, but then there's also the real life implications of this. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty. It's the life of the woman, but what does that mean exactly? Does she have to be gravely ill? How does that? I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and we've seen that in other states as well.
Yeah, and Chris Mays said today that she has a team of lawyers. They're looking at this ruling, and they're going to try to figure out ways to challenge it. And yes, this was the Arizona Supreme Court. There are not really federal constitutional issues with this ruling, but we're now talking about a different law. That law was not at issue in this case. This case was pretty straightforward. The Arizona Supreme Court looked at whether the Arizona legislature ever repealed this 1800s era law, and they decided that it didn't, and so they decided it was in effect. But now these lawyers are going to be looking at that law and saying, are there due process challenges here? Like Amy said, it doesn't define what a life-threatening illness would be. Is preeclampsia a life-threatening illness? Is an ectopic pregnancy one? And these are arguments that probably smart people would argue and come to different answers. How do you enforce a law that people don't know whether they've violated the law, and that's really probably one of the issues that lawyers are going to attack on this.
All right, let's play that sound clip now from Chris Mays. I think we have that queued up, and I want people to take a look at this right now.
We are looking at everything on the table available to us to fight this decision. Everything is on the table, and we will pursue every option available to us to ensure that this decision is never implemented in the state of Arizona.
And another interesting thing that Chris Mays was at that press conference as well today, she said that she thinks that she can stop, and has said that she can block county attorneys from enforcing this law. I went and asked them, I've asked them before, asked them again today, like, where do you find this in the statutes? And they say, well, it's in the definitions of the office. Have you guys looked at any of this?
I have not.
Well, Katie Hobbs implemented an executive order that she says gives Chris Mays the authority, and only the authority, to prosecute these cases. So it would have to be a county attorney who wants to regain that authority, wants to challenge the governor's authority to vest that responsibility on the attorney general. It would be up to them to challenge it in court. County attorneys across the state have been deathly silent on this issue, have not reached out. It is interesting to see that the Pima County attorney was one of the challengers of this case, and the Yavapai County attorney was on the other side. So just by having them on different sides of the arguments here gives you an idea that they view this differently. But just this afternoon, when we were going to tape our 6 o'clock news or 6:30 newscast today, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office released a statement on social media saying that they have no intention of investigating any of the cases related to this law. They said that they are busy fighting crime and keeping the streets safe, but they also said that they are not aware of any county attorney who would pursue one of these cases either.
Yeah, and Chris Mays went on to say, too, she called this a stain on the state as well as the court, and said it was maybe the worst decision in the court's history of the state. But I want to get back to, I think, questions on everybody's minds are, look, we've got the 60-day window we're in, barring any other legal challenges. Are there any legal challenges left with this law that we should be looking for, that the public should be expecting?
I think that's uncertain right now.
Yeah, it's going to be up to probably the Arizona Attorney General or some of these other, the ACLU or Planned Parenthood. But, looking at the 1860s law now and attacking that, that's a new claim for them, a new way for them to look at that. That would be a way for them to potentially at least put the implementation on hold. Whether they ultimately find out that this law is unconstitutional because of due process, or that it is vague and unenforceable, that decision would be down, down the sidewalk, down the street. But what that would do would give that side time to get this ballot initiative on, or get the legislature to enact a new law that repeals this 1860s law.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that because that's a big thing here. That's something that Governor Katie Hobbs has been talking about. And I do want to play some sound from what the governor had to say at her press conference today. And this was moments after this ruling came down here. Check this out.
To the people across Arizona who are concerned about the future of abortion rights in our state, who are worried about their bodily autonomy, who don't want to see the freedom of their wives, sisters, and daughters restricted, you can make your concerns known at the ballot box, and I encourage you to do so.
She is very much encouraging people to get involved with that ballot initiative. We'll get to that in a second. She also called on the legislature to go and repeal that 1864 law. It seems to me, I've covered that place for a whole long time. It seems to me that that's a pretty tough ask of this governor for this legislature that is controlled by Republicans to move forward with this. I mean, have you guys looked at any of this? What do you see moving forward with that? Any possibilities there? A lot of statements given out by some of these Republican lawmakers. What do you see?
Right, but statements are one thing and action is another. And it doesn't seem like there is a will there for them to act. So, I mean, we'll see in the coming days. But, I think the real focus is on that ballot initiative, with which those behind it are saying they have enough signatures to get it on the ballot.
Yeah, and one thing, too, to keep in mind, is there is a bill that was introduced by a Democrat, Stall Hamilton, and earlier this year has not been heard in committee, and it would repeal the 1864 law. It would repeal that ban. It would be very nice and clean, but would it reinstate the 15-week law? That's the possibility. Democrats were asked today if they would agree to that, and Democrats don't seem they want to agree with that. They don't want to abide by that 15-week abortion ban because, again, that law also does not include any exceptions for rape and incest. That's a big talk. That's a big, it's a non-starter for Democrats. So, like, I'm just kind of wondering, where are we with this moving forward? I'm thinking that this ballot initiative is going to have a whole lot of fuel moving forward.
Yeah, that seems to be what they're channeling their energies on. And you and I were talking about this earlier. Even if these, two Republican lawmakers who issued statements today that said that they would like to repeal that 1860s law, even if they got a bill out there, would they have a majority of their caucus, which tradition shows they would need to move it forward because, as you said in our newscast earlier today, leaders become non-leaders if they start dealing with the other side, and that's just the way the politics are right now. And we also don't know if Democrats would vote for it. So that does seem like it's a far-fetched idea that might come to fruition.
Yeah, and it seems like Democrats, it's a really strange position for them at this point. They hold all the leverage on this when it comes to this issue because they feel like all the momentum is on their side. The ballot initiative, the crew trying to expand abortion to access, enshrine the protections in the state constitution. They've got 500,000 signatures to qualify for the ballot. They only needed 383,000. They got far more than that. They're going to continue to get those signatures. They could get a whole lot more after this ruling. So they've got a lot of power with that. The polling, what's the polling saying about that? We've seen any polling on this that you guys can talk a little bit about that shows that maybe this effort, this ballot initiative, as Democrats claim, they say it's going to easily pass, or not easily pass, but it'll pass with a strong majority.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly seems to be the case right now. And, what happened today puts this issue front and center in front of people. And I know, those advocates were out gathering more signatures today. So, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
The polling that I've seen is sort of all over the board, but you don't really see a poll that has less than 59%, high 50s of supporting abortion rights, and you don't see one that has much higher than 80, 85%. And it really comes down to what the specifics are. And it's interesting because in this ballot initiative, the specifics would be 22, 24 months. There is a significant amount of people who support abortion rights that think that that's a little high. So is that going to be something that turns them off? Maybe not if it's no abortion rights or that.
Yeah, I think this frames, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, I think this really frames and sharpens that kind of decision, what's at stake when we move forward, with voters move forward with this in November. Because like I think you put it there, it's I think the campaign is going to be, it's a clear choice. Do you want access to this procedure, or do you not want access to this procedure? And I think the polls overwhelmingly show, at least the ones I've seen over the years, that people do want access to this. It's a question of how much access do you want to give. That is what it comes down to. I guess, moving forward, the ballot initiative that's moving forward, what would be in that? That is how much does it expand access to abortion? This basically would reinstate the protections under Roe versus Wade?
Yeah, reinstate the protections under Roe versus Wade, 22 or 24 weeks. I'm not sure exactly what that number is, but it also creates an exception for when the physical health of the mother is at stake, or the mental health of the mother is at stake. And those are two new the mental health part is a new exception on there. So it does greatly expand the right and the access to abortion in Arizona.
Okay, and I want to start talking a little bit about Republicans and how they're responding a little bit more. And I want to start with a tweet from Governor Ducey, the man who signed this law back in 2022. If we could pull that up right now, and there it is. It says, "I signed the 15-week law as governor because it is thoughtful, conservative policy and an approach to this very sensitive issue that Arizonans can actually agree agree on. Now, if you want to add some context to that tweet, it said the ruling today is not the outcome I would have preferred. I call on our elected leaders to heed the will of the people and address this issue with the policy that is workable and reflective of our electorate. Again, you want to put some context around this, but Doug Ducey was told that this was one of the possible outcomes. I know this because I was at plenty of press conferences when he was asked about this. Still, he moved forward. He signed this bill, and this was his court, as you guys mentioned, that went forward and and reinstated this law. So for him to be coming out and say I'm disappointed in this, or to say he's even shocked, I think it just needs that kind of context. What are you hearing from some of the Republicans today? Because I'm hearing from T.J. Shope. I'm hearing from people like Matt Gress down at the legislature. What are you guys hearing?
Yeah, it's a bit of a shift for them, for sure. It's interesting because that 15-week ban was when it was widely believed the Supreme Court was going to come down on the Mississippi case, and be a little bit more specific in the ruling, not as broad as they were, and strike down Roe v. Wade. So, it was specifically tailored to that. So it's an interesting shift now to say that he supports that 15-week ban.
Yeah, they were dead set when this went into effect, when he signed this, that this was not going to reinstate the Civil War era anti-abortion law, even though in its language it says it does not repeal that law. It also says it doesn't repeal the other abortion laws that were passed in Arizona, and those laws create a right for a physician to administer an abortion to somebody. But it certainly was not clear-cut.
Yeah. Yeah, and politically, too, it's having some ramifications as well. I want to pull up this Carrie Lake tweet, obviously, former governor candidate now running for the U.S. Senate, says, I oppose today's ruling, and I am calling on Katie Hobbs and the state legislature to come up with an immediate common-sense solution that Arizonans can support. Wow, she's singing a different tune than she was 2 years ago, right, Morgan?
That's some whiplash there. She has been pretty outspoken in her stance as an anti-abortion politician, as an anti-abortion advocate. And up until today, I thought that was still her stance.
Right, time and again, at every press conference, when she was asked about it, she said she supported that ruling that dates back to 1864.
Yeah,
So,
she's on tape.
Yeah.
She's recorded saying that, and today we see something different. And is this a realization that a politician might not be able to get elected with a stance like this? There has to be some sort of calculation in there.
Yeah, and I want to play her likely opponent, Ruben Gallego, had some colorful sound earlier today. Let's roll that right now.
I said it before, after the Dobbs decision, that I'm sorry to the women of Arizona and that this is bullshit, because it still is bullshit. What happened today, the fact that women in Arizona now have less rights than they ever had, have no control of their bodies, it's just inhumane.
Some really strong words, very passionate issue out there. What do you take from where Ruben's come from? What do you guys take from that, the statement like that?
This is a winning issue for him. That's how he sees it.
Yeah, this is a gift to Democratic lawmakers who are running in closely contested races, because it is likely going to galvanize the Democratic vote. How much of people who show up to the polls to vote for that initiative, the ballot initiative, are going to vote for the initiative and then still vote for a conservative candidate? There will likely be some there. There's probably also going to be some people who may not have otherwise voted, who are now going to show up. They're going to vote for the ballot initiative. They're going to vote for people like Ruben Gallego. They're going to vote for people like Joe Biden. And it is, undoubtedly going to be some kind of a boost for Democrats.
And it's probably going to have a big boost up and down the ballot. I know earlier today, Morgan was asking me how many swing districts are there in the legislature. And my answer is typically it's less than 6. I think it's about 5. But if you really want to know where the real hardcore swing districts are, just look at who released statements today. Republicans who released statements today who said that they disagree with this ruling. You got T.J. Shope down in Coolidge. You've got Matt Gress in Central Phoenix. And oddly enough, and ironically enough, Shauna Bullock, who's married to Justice Clint Bullock, who is on this ruling today.
Wow.
That was such That is a fascinating story.
Yeah.
She disagrees with her husband's ruling. And I think she had been interviewed once before and said that if this 1860s law goes into effect, I'm going to lose my election. I will get voted out and we will get voted out. I mean, she saw this coming. It might be an interesting dinner table conversation between those two this evening.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to be a fly on that wall, right, to see. But I think it's also important to note the younger voters. You know, I think there is some concern from Democrats that they wouldn't be energized come November, you know, and just covering some of these protests when Roe v. Wade fell. It was mostly young folks that were out there, you know, protesting. And so this is certainly an issue that a lot of young people feel strongly about, you know, and might actually get them to the polls come November.
Yeah, and I can tell you too from my conversations from real rot-rib Republicans, they feel like the dog that caught the car with this one. Like for such a long time, this was a real issue for Republicans to oppose abortion and try to repeal Roe v. Wade. That finally happened, and now they're kind of stuck going, well, what are we doing now? This could create a backlash for them. I wanted to say could because we don't know what voters do when it comes November.
Right. And it's we can't discount the number of voters out there in the bloc that are probably happy with this ruling and might show up because they are energized by this ruling. That, you know, they call themselves the pro-life or the anti-abortion. That segment of voters are very happy today. And it will be interesting to see if they're energized to show up. But what we do know is that in other states, even dark red states like Kansas, when an issue like this has come to the ballot, the people who are supporting abortion access overwhelm the other side at the ballot, and these ballot initiatives have passed.
Well, and Kathy Herod, I can tell you, I've covered her for years. Very smart, savvy political veteran of Arizona. She knows what she's doing. She thinks she's going to be there. They'll be victorious come November. But want to play a soundbite from the other side. This is a woman who's very integral, Chris Love. She's very integral in that Abortion Access Act that they're trying to pass. I want to play the sound from her right now and get some reaction.
What constitutes a medical emergency? I mean, how much risk does there have to be of death? How much risk of morbidity? What types of morbidity, you know, permanent harm? To try to legislate that puts the burden on the clinicians to try and decide what the law thinks is a medical emergency. And of course, sometimes they're going to err on the side of protecting themselves liability-wise so they don't go to prison.
Now, I do want to say that was not Chris Love speaking there, I don't think. I think standing next to her was Chris Love right there. I'm not exactly sure who that was speaking, but if you could just respond to the comments.
Yeah, that was a great point, and that's something we had been talking about. Because this law isn't specific, because it doesn't list what makes up a life-threatening situation. I don't even know if it's possible to list it, but this law does not list it. Those are real questions there, and those are real questions that a judge may have to answer. Or, you know, who's going to make that decision? Is it going to be your doctor? Are they going to always give the benefit of the doubt to a doctor? It's a real part of this law that is open to a challenge.
And it's a situation that we've seen play out in Texas, you know, where there are doctors who are really concerned about the criminal liability, about losing their license, and so they have backed away from doing it. There are fewer of them performing these procedures, which leaves women with less access, having to travel further to get the care that they need.
All right, and I think we're getting a little long here, so I want to wrap, and I want to end here like one of the things that stuck out to you today for whatever reason that is. And I'll go ahead and start. I thought one of the more interesting comments I saw today. Governor Hobbs said she was going to make sure that women have the access, have the resources to get access to abortion. And to me, I read that, I heard that, and I was like, well, that's going to have to be out of state then. So she's, what exactly does that mean moving forward? Something that we'll be reporting on and continuing to watch. But I found that to be a fascinating statement that you have a sitting governor saying, look, we're going to make sure women can get across state lines if that's what they need to do to get access to this medical care.
And under a loose reading of this law, that might be illegal.
Oh,
it might be illegal to help somebody go across state lines. I mean, I've got the actual language of the law. It's not very long. It says, a person who provides, supplies, or administers to a pregnant woman or procures such woman to take any medicine, drugs, or substance, or uses or employs any instrument or any means whatever with intent thereby to procure the miscarriage of such woman, unless it is necessary to save her life, shall be punished by imprisonment. So it really sets out like the potential for, if you help somebody to go get an abortion, there's a possibility that you could be prosecuted. Again, it's this old language that's a little vague and could be construed different ways.
It's a different time when that law was in place. But yeah, you want to wrap there? Anything else that stood out with you guys want to talk about before we get going?
I think it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out for women who find themselves in this situation, because it raises questions about the morning after pill that is now available in pharmacies. I mean, what happens there? And for young women hearing this, how they respond to it. I think there are real people that we really have to keep in mind. And
would that Howell law,
right.
did that even contemplate things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it talks about drugs and instruments and that kind of thing. So it looks like it could be very subjective to who is reading it and making that decision.
All right, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank you, too, for joining me today. And thanks for everybody who tuned in, listened, however you're watching this. We'll be back Sunday with the regular podcast of Politics Unplugged. So good night, everyone.
Thanks for listening. You can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, the Google Store, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. See you next time.